Some folks asked for evidence that the theology that was in my worship music from the early church was actually the theology of the early church. So here goes. It's important to note that the theology of the early church is not monolithic. There were lots of churches and lots of theologians, and they had disagreements, but there are some things that we can pretty confidently say. The quote, "all riches come from injustice," is a direct quote from St. Jerome, that if you are wealthy, that can only happen through some form of injustice. Private property being a form of theft comes from lots of church fathers. You'll see it in John Chrysostom. Basil of Caesarea said basically, if you have something that you could give to the poor, but you don't, that's thievery. You can read about the anti-mammon, anti-capitalist quotes from the early church, from the excellent book, All Riches Come from an Injustice by Stephen D. Morrison. Line, "one day hell will be empty," is a form of patristic universalism or early Christian universalism that held that there was a hell that had restorative or curative properties, basically curing people from the disease of sin, and that one day hell would be emptied out. There's lots of debate about how widespread universalism was in the first few centuries of the church. St. Augustine said that it was pretty darn widespread, if not the majority opinion. And then there are just like dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of quotes from the early church fathers that held to some form of universalism. You can read about that in A Larger Hope by Dr. Ramelli, which is all about the early church and their writings and how universalism was pretty darn common and widespread until basically Augustine. Screw you, Augustine. And then in my very earnest rendition of Breathe, I Won't Join the Army, you have plenty of church fathers who said things like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, quoting Isaiah 2, Jesus came to undo the weapons of war. And then the most active arguer against joining the army was Tertullian, who said that Jesus undid the belt of war, and that Jesus said you cannot serve both God and mammon. You cannot serve two masters, which means you can't join the military, because that means you'd be serving the master of war. And you can read about that in Ron Sider's The Early Church on Killing. I will give the caveat that there is not nearly enough nuance on the sections on abortion.